millions of dollars in tech, a team of elite engineers, 3 full days of non-stop troubleshooting, and yet the Navy's most advanced warship wouldn't move an inch. Then a retired veteran walked in with nothing but a stethoscope and did the impossible in 5 minutes. The USS Valor was a floating fortress, sleek, modern, and equipped with cutting-edge military technology. It was the Navy's newest pride, boasting a next-generation propulsion system, AI-integrated operations, and state-of-the-art defense capabilities. It was designed to be the ultimate war machine, fast, smart, unstoppable. But now, it sat helplessly docked at Norfolk Naval Base. Silent, dead. Its multi-million-dollar engine had failed, and no one could figure out why. Inside the engine room, chaos ruled. Tools lay scattered across the floor. Technicians barked updates into headsets, and a half-dozen military engineers pored over manuals, tablets, and cables, each more frustrated than the last. Rear Admiral Thomas Whitaker stood on the command deck, staring out at the massive ship with narrowed eyes. For the past 72 hours, every expert available had tried to revive the Valor's propulsion system and failed. "Sir," said Chief Engineer Hammond, wiping sweat from his brow, "we've gone over every wire, every sensor. Software diagnostics show no faults. Cooling, hydraulics, fuel, all clean. The engine just won't fire." Whitaker, a man who had seen battles at sea and in the Pentagon, folded his arms tightly. "That's not good enough, Chief. We got a mission clock ticking. High Command won't wait forever." "I know, sir, but we've even brought in outside contractors, civilian specialists. Nothing's worked." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "Let me get this straight. This ship, which cost the taxpayers nearly $1 billion to build, is completely dead because nobody knows what's wrong." "Yes, sir," Hammond said reluctantly. "And nobody can fix it?" A pause. "No, sir." Whitaker turned away from the railing, rubbing his temples. He wasn't just upset, he was embarrassed. This wasn't just a warship. It was a symbol of American naval power, and it had been humiliated by its own complexity. Just then, a younger lieutenant walked up with a tablet in hand. "Sir, the latest software patch just finished running." Still no response from the engine interface. Whitaker didn't answer. He was staring off into space, his mind racing. Somewhere in the back of his memory, a name floated to the surface. A legend from his early days as a junior officer. A man who had fixed machines others declared unfixable. A man who had retired years ago, but whose touch with engines bordered on supernatural. Whitaker pulled out his phone and dialed. A raspy voice answered on the third ring. "You're either calling for a favor or a miracle." The Admiral smiled. "Maybe both, Elijah." The next morning, a dusty blue pickup truck pulled up to the naval dock. It didn't look like it belonged there, not among the sleek black government SUVs and uniformed officers pacing the platform. But no one questioned it, at least not after the man stepped out. Elijah Brooks, or as many knew him in whispered tones, Chief Fix-It, had arrived. He was 67 now, a bit slower in step, but still sharp-eyed and broad-shouldered. His navy blue coveralls were patched at the elbows, and his weather-worn cap read simply, U.S. Navy Veteran. Around his neck hung a stethoscope, not the medical kind, a mechanic stethoscope, modified with copper tubing and a custom amplifier. The dock officer stared. Who was this old man showing up in work boots and carrying a tool bag that looked older than the ship itself? Rear Admiral Whitaker stepped forward and greeted him with a warm handshake. "You made good time." Brooks smiled. "Didn't want your billion-dollar toy rusting while you wait on engineers with fancy degrees." "You brought the stethoscope, I see." Brooks patted it gently. "Best tool I've ever owned. This thing's found more problems than a dozen computers ever could." The Admiral led him onto the ship. As they descended into the engine room, the temperature rose, and so did the tension. A room full of engineers and technicians all paused to glance at the old man entering their space. Some gave polite nods. Others smirked, whispering to each other. "Who's that? Some retired mechanic from the Cold War. Does he even know how to use a computer?" Whitaker silenced them with a sharp glance. "This man built engines before most of you were born. If you're smart, you'll watch and learn." Elijah said nothing. He set down his bag and walked straight to the main propulsion unit. No laptop, no scanner, no codebook, just that odd copper stethoscope. He placed the tip against the side of the main chamber, closed his eyes, and listened. Silence. Then a faint thunk, or hiss. The engineers watched with a mix of confusion and curiosity. One leaned over to another. Is he listening to the engine breathe? Elijah moved slowly, methodically, checking different sections of the engine housing, the turbine intake, the exhaust manifold, the gear housing. With each touch, he nodded slightly, like a doctor examining a patient's heartbeat. After 15 minutes, he finally spoke. You replaced the fuel sensor controller, right? Chief Engineer Hammond blinked. Yes, that was the first thing we did. Well, it wasn't the sensor. It was the bypass solenoid feeding the sensor. It's stuck half closed. The computer thinks the tank's empty, so it's blocking ignition. Hammond furrowed his brow, but the diagnostics didn't pick that up. They wouldn't, Elijah replied. The sensor's fine. It's reading what it's getting, just not getting enough to read. You're treating the symptom, not the disease. He opened his old tool bag, pulled out a wrench that looked custom-made, and with a few twists and taps, adjusted the bypass unit. Then he closed the panel, wiped his hands, and turned to Hammond. Try now. A moment later, the ignition switch was pressed. Whirrum vroom. The engine roared to life like a beast awakened from a long sleep. The entire room froze, then erupted into stunned applause. The Admiral just smiled. You still got it, Chief. Elijah grinned, wiped his hands on a rag, and said, Told you. These things don't die. They just need someone to listen. The USS Valor was alive again. Its mighty engine rumbled like thunder through the hull, a low growl that echoed pride and power. On deck, the crew cheered. Even some of the skeptical engineers clapped. They had spent days combing through every wire and circuit, only to be outdone in 15 minutes by a man with no tech, no laptop, and no patience for nonsense. But not everyone was thrilled. Chief Engineer Hammond stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. The fix had worked, sure, but to him, it felt like a punch to the gut. 3 days of his team's efforts overshadowed in a heartbeat by a retired mechanic with an old-school attitude and a stethoscope. Lieutenant Morgan, a young systems specialist, approached him quietly. Sir, did you see how fast he found the issue? He didn't even need a diagnostic interface. Hammond didn't look at him. Yeah, I saw it. Morgan hesitated. Do you think we could learn from him? Hammond turned sharply. We don't need to be taking lessons from someone who fixed battleships before Wi-Fi even existed. Down below, Elijah had already packed up his tools. He knew how it went. People loved results, but pride always complicated the celebration. He'd been called into bases before where the top dogs refused to acknowledge his help, even after he saved their machines from total failure. Ego was a tougher engine to fix than any piece of metal. Admiral Whitaker met him as he walked up the ramp. You've still got the magic touch. No magic, Elijah replied. Just experience and ears that know what to listen for. The Admiral looked down the corridor where some of the younger engineers were now gathering around the solenoid that Elijah had adjusted, taking notes. You know, Whitaker said, I think some of these kids could really use what you've got. I'm not here to teach a class, Elijah replied. Just came to fix a machine. I know, but what if I asked you to stay for a few days? Show the crew a few tricks. Train the next generation. Elijah raised an eyebrow. You trying to drag me out of retirement? I'm trying to keep ships like this from falling apart every time a computer can't find the answer. Elijah considered it for a moment. I'll stay until tomorrow. After that, I go back to my tool shed. Whitaker smiled. That's more than fair. Back in the engine room, something surprising happened. One by one, a few of the younger officers began to approach Elijah. Sir, said one petty officer, can I ask what you were listening for exactly? I've never seen anyone do that. Elijah didn't respond right away. Instead, he handed the young sailor his stethoscope. Here, try it. Listen close. Every engine has a voice. You just got to learn its language. Over the next 2 hours, Elijah stood in the engine bay, surrounded by curious minds, explaining the sounds, the rhythms, the signs that no sensor could ever detect. He didn't lecture. He demonstrated. He let them hear for themselves. And slowly, something changed. The skepticism faded. Respect started to grow. By nightfall, even Hammond made his way over, quietly, reluctantly, and joined the circle. He didn't say anything, but he listened. Sometimes that's the first step. By sunrise, the USS Valor was humming like it had never stopped. Crew members moved with a new energy. Systems were back online, diagnostics green, and preparation for the postponed mission resumed without a hitch. But deep in the ship's engine bay, something even more valuable was happening. Elijah Brooks was still there. What had started with a single stethoscope and a quick fix had turned into a hands-on masterclass. Word had spread fast. Young officers from nearby vessels, destroyers, carriers, even submarines docked at Norfolk began showing up, curious to learn from the old legend in coveralls. Elijah didn't care about ranks or resumes. If they were willing to listen, he was willing to teach. "I don't care if your uniform's pressed or wrinkled," he told them. "An engine doesn't salute. It just runs or it doesn't." He showed them tricks no textbook mentioned: how to recognize imbalance from vibration alone, how to diagnose airflow by the pitch of a turbine, and how to catch fuel pressure issues just by the rhythm of the hum. Things you could only learn after decades of working with machines and listening to them. Admiral Whitaker walked in on one of the sessions and watched quietly as Elijah placed his hand on the side of a motor and asked a petty officer, "What's she saying to you?" The young sailor tilted his head. "I think it's running too rich." Elijah nodded. "Exactly. Now tell me why." It wasn't just education. It was a lost art being passed down before it disappeared forever. That afternoon, Admiral Whitaker received a call from Navy Command in Washington. News of the incident and the miraculous fix had reached the top. "You really brought in a retired chief to fix a billion-dollar engine?" the vice admiral on the other end asked. "Yes, sir," Whitaker replied. "And I'd do it again." He saved the mission and taught half my crew more in 12 hours than a month of simulation ever could. There was a long pause. Then the vice admiral said, "We want to talk to him. We're considering creating a new role, a senior technical advisor for fleet maintenance and field training. We need people like him teaching the next generation." Whitaker smiled. "I'll pass that along." Later that evening, he met with Elijah over coffee in the ship's galley. The veteran sat with grease still on his sleeves, sipping from a plain mug. "They want to offer you something bigger," Whitaker said. "A new role. Not just this ship, the entire fleet. You'd travel, teach, consult." Elijah leaned back in his chair. "I retired for a reason, Tom," he said quietly. "I didn't leave the Navy because I couldn't do the work. I left because they stopped listening." "They're listening now," Whitaker said. "They need you. And this time, they're not just asking you to fix engines. They're asking you to shape the future." Elijah looked out the window at the horizon, thinking long and hard. He never cared about titles or promotions. He just wanted to make machines run right and help people understand them. Now, for the first time in decades, the Navy seemed to understand him. Elijah didn't sleep much that night. He lay awake in the small guest quarters the Admiral had arranged for him aboard the USS Valor, listening to the distant hum of the now fully functioning engine. It was a sound most people would have ignored, but to him, it was comforting like a heartbeat. Steady, strong, alive. By morning, the decision was made. At breakfast, Admiral Whitaker met him in the mess hall. "Well," he asked, not needing to say anything more. Elijah smiled slowly. "I'll do it. Not forever, but long enough to make a difference." The Admiral exhaled, clearly relieved. "You just made a lot of sailors very lucky." In the weeks that followed, the Navy launched a new program called Veteran Technical Mentorship, with Elijah as its founding advisor. He traveled base to base, ship to ship, holding informal workshops and hands-on sessions. Word spread like wildfire. Wherever he went, young sailors lined up not for signatures, but for stories, guidance, and real-world wisdom. They didn't just learn how to fix engines. They learned how to think, how to feel what a machine was trying to say, how to trust their instincts when the diagnostics didn't add up, and most importantly, how to respect the people who came before them. At one session in San Diego, a young recruit nervously asked, "Chief, how did you learn all this without computers?" Elijah laughed. "Because back in my day, if you didn't fix it with your hands and ears, it stayed broken. He paused, then added, "Don't get me wrong. Computers are great, but never let them replace your brain. Machines have logic, but humans? We've got experience. Use both." His words resonated deeply. Many of the recruits had never met someone like him, someone who carried both oil stains and honor, who never raised his voice but commanded respect. He was proof that wisdom wasn't about how much you knew from books. It was about how much you had lived through and learned from. Meanwhile, the USS Valor completed its postponed mission successfully. The very engine that had failed before now ran more efficiently than ever. And word was, the crew had even renamed part of the mechanical bay, unofficially, Brooks Corner. As the year went on, Elijah began to slow down. His knees ached more. Travel got tiring. But his impact? That only grew. When he finally stepped away from the program a year later, the Navy held a private ceremony for him. No medals, no press, just sailors from all over the country, many of whom had been trained by him directly, gathering to say thank you. One young woman from a USS Franklin stepped forward and handed him a plaque. It read, "To Chief Elijah Brooks, the man who listened when no one else could." He held in his hands, nodded once, and said with a small smile, "Now that means something." As he walked off base for the last time, he turned one last time toward the shipyard, toward the place he'd given so much of his life. The machines still hummed. But now, so did the people who maintained them. Because of him,